Hello and welcome to another edition of the INSS English podcast. My name is Mor Yahalom and my guest today is Sara Greenberg. Sara made Aliyah in 2015 and was the Prime Minister's advisor for foreign affairs. Hi Sara, it's great to have you with us.
Hi Mor, thanks for having me.
So today's edition will discuss a latest INSS publication, the coronavirus crisis, recommendations for the State of Israel. The publication was written by a team of experts from a variety of fields and led by Gadi Eisenkot, former IDF Chief of Staff and currently a senior research fellow here at the INSS. The goal of this project was to try to look beyond the challenges that the coronavirus crisis posed for Israel and search for the opportunities that might arise from this very crazy environment. This publication is composed of 6 papers, each discussing another topic and the opportunities in this specific topic, in this specific field. The topics that we covered were economy, security, regional cooperation, technology, health, and Aliyah. And today we were fortunate to have Sara as the author of the paper on Aliyah, where she focused on promoting Aliyah to Israel in a post-corona world. So Sara, let's start with the basics. Why is Aliyah important, and what was the state of Aliyah before COVID?
So just as Israel has been sustained by Aliyah over the years, the Jewish people have been sustained by the opportunity to make Aliyah. Since its establishment, Israel has served as an essential refuge for Jewish people escaping anti-Semitism and different kinds of hardship. And at the same time, with each wave of Aliyah, Israel has benefited from an influx of new qualities, ideas, and skills. In terms of the state of Aliyah before COVID, in 2019, a little bit over 35,000 Olim made Israel their home, compared to 18,000 Olim in 2009. Most of the Olim in 2019 came from Eastern Europe, around 70%, most notably from Russia and the Ukraine, followed by North America, which was 10%. The number of Olim from North America has declined in recent years. In 2018, there were 6% less Olim from North America than the year prior. So one thing that's important and interesting to note is that despite the fact that the largest Jewish diaspora community by far is in North America, not only have the numbers been declining pre-COVID, but there's never been a major Aliyah from the US or Canada since the establishment of the state.
Okay. So what were the main trends that you've identified as affecting the Jewish diaspora? And were they a result of COVID or did they start a long time ago?
So when I looked at the trends affecting Jewish communities abroad, and specifically I looked a lot in North America just to understand why there had never been a wave of Aliyah from North America, and perhaps thinking that COVID presented a unique opportunity to attract Olim from countries that wouldn't come to Israel otherwise. I tried to focus on trends that both existed before Corona and also were either heightened as a result of Corona or new trends that came up. So the first one that came to mind was looking at the rise of anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitic incidents are on the rise around the world. 2019 saw an 18% rise in anti-Semitic violence, which was continuing a steady rise in attacks seen in recent years. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, did a survey in 2020, which was actually conducted before the coronavirus pandemic broke out in North America, and found that almost 2/3 of American Jews feel less safe now than at any other time in the last 10 years. COVID, I believe, based on some of the reports I've seen, seems to have only exacerbated this trend. So there was a recent report from Tel Aviv University that showed that since the beginning of the corona pandemic, there's been a significant rise in accusations that Jews, both as individuals and as a group, are behind the spread of the virus. and are directly profiting from it, suggesting that anti-Semitism will only continue to rise post-epidemic, perhaps at an accelerated rate. Another trend that's connected perhaps to rising anti-Semitism is an emerging openness to emigrate. So there was a recent survey in Europe led by the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights that found that 40% of European Jews under the age of 60 have considered emigrating because of the rise of anti-Semitism. And so while it's unclear where they intend to immigrate to, this is important for Israel to understand because it presents an opportunity for Israel to present itself or position itself as the destination of choice. I'm not aware of other surveys that's similar in other countries or in North America. That sort of remains unknown, but the fact that there's such a staggering rise in openness to move countries in Europe indicates that there might be more of a global trend for the Jewish communities around the world. Other trends, if we look at rising healthcare costs, in the US, for example, rising healthcare costs have been a concern for households for the last few years. Americans are paying more out of pocket than ever before. By 2027, healthcare costs in the US are expected to increase to roughly $17,000 per person. It sort of remains to be seen, given the political situation in the US and the ramifications of COVID, what will happen. But assuming the trend continues, Israel's nationalized healthcare model may prove increasingly attractive to American Jews, assuming that our healthcare system here continues to be seen as a low-cost and effective option. The last trend I'll highlight, now there are more written about in the paper, but would be unemployment. So clearly coronavirus has left millions around the world without work. In the US alone, I believe the numbers have reached close to 25 million, and if not more, of unemployed, and the numbers are rising every day. So while all countries around the world, including Israel, will struggle with unemployment, I want to highlight this trend in terms of its impact for Aliyah, because mostly employment is what drives people's unwillingness to move, meaning they have economic stability, there are incentives to stay at their existing companies, whether it's shares vesting or bonus packages. And without those incentives in place, the coronavirus may serve as a catalyst to rethink opportunities abroad. But again, the key question in terms of promoting Aliyah would be whether Israel comes out of the crisis in an economically stable position with companies interested in hiring new workers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Aliyah was identified in other papers as well as a potential booster for economic growth. But with that comes large, high rates of unemployment in Israel as well. So it could be counterintuitive for some people why encouraging Aliyah during this time might be beneficial, why it is an opportunity for Israel. So can you talk a little bit about that and why is it an opportunity for Israel? And then if you can elaborate on your recommendations that you made in the paper to help Israel and achieve this goal of encouraging Aliyah.
Sure. So it's a good question you raised, because coming out of COVID or even amidst COVID, all countries are going to need to seek creative solution to turn the tides of what is an inevitable economic downturn. For Israel specifically, a new wave of educated and motivated immigrants could prove to help the situation. One example of how the economy specifically stands to benefit was that even if the government invests in helping Olim or new immigrants get settled in Israel, there was a 2009 report commissioned by Nefesh B'Nefesh that shows that Olim from Western countries return all government investment within 2 years after Aliyah. So there are a lot of arguments to be made about why we should be attracting particularly immigrants with education, with ability to contribute to the economy, to come now to Israel, both to hopefully have a brighter economic future and also for the country to benefit. In terms of some of my recommendations that appeared in the paper, I think first and foremost, the country needs to decide that Aliyah should be a national priority. The first thing to do would be to establish an interministerial task force to get everyone on the same page. This should include members of the Prime Minister's office, the Ministry of Immigration and Absorption, the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education, a lot of ministries, and to essentially come together to formulate a plan to promote the immigration of Jews and to better facilitate their absorption in Israel. This committee should focus on doing some preliminary research to understand what are the key levers or drivers that would bring people to Israel. And then following that research, I would say that they need to match the motivation with resources and decide to double or even triple the resources allocated to promote Aliyah and absorption. Given what I highlighted earlier in terms of how important employment is for driving these decisions, there needs to be a real emphasis in improving employment opportunities for Olim. So the employment barrier could be addressed in a number of different ways, but a few ideas include providing career guidance services and degree recognition even before Olim have left their countries of origin, providing access to a government-sponsored employment agency and advertising available jobs before Aliyah. And then I think also the country needs to figure out how to fast-track recognition of professional credentials and build more training and placement programs. I think there also is an opportunity to figure out how to provide coronavirus aid. This could take a lot of different forms: healthcare equipment, moral support to Jewish communities around the world. If Israel is seen as helping Jewish communities during this time of crisis, I believe this would promote goodwill and position Israel as a country that, even though is trying to do its best to withstand the crisis here, is still focused on helping Jews around the world. And this could be also matched with some sort of public relations campaign that would show what Israel is doing to thwart the crisis and how it hopes to be in the future a secure and safe alternative for any Jew around the world who wishes to make Israel its home.
So how much do you think the success of Israel in managing the crisis is related to the potential of encouraging Aliyah?
I think the better that Israel weathers the crisis, the more obvious a choice it could become for Jews living around the world. I think everything is relative in terms of how Israel not only is managing the crisis right now, but how ultimately it's seen as managing the crisis, but how that compares to the different countries around the world. So if Israel is seen as coming out of this in a way that is, the healthcare system has not only survived, but perhaps even become stronger based on different recommendations that have been implemented by some of the other people that worked with us on the report. It's seen as a place where there are employment opportunities, of course, that will provide a bigger boost of interest in people coming here.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. The publication of Coronavirus Crisis Recommendations for the State of Israel is available at the INSS website, currently in Hebrew, but it will be available in English as well soon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Hope to see you again next time.